This is Canon's brand new PowerShot V1, and after spending a few days with it in Hawaii, I think it might be one of the best cameras for YouTube and vlogging. Welcome back to Think Media, Nate here. Now, Canon flew me out along with a bunch of other creators to check out their new PowerShot V1 as well as the new R50V, which I also am pretty excited about, but I really found myself gravitating towards this new PowerShot V1. Now, there are a bunch of different categories I want to cover in this video, but let's start off with the design and the build quality. The Canon PowerShot V1 is a point and shoot style of camera. This means you cannot swap out the lenses, but this does have some benefits, and we'll touch on the lens a little bit later on. But when I picked up this camera for the first time, I just realized how well built it truly was. It has a nice rubber grip along the whole body of the camera, so it never felt like it was going to slip out of my hand, which was really good, especially when I was filming on this boat. I didn't want to risk dropping it, so it just felt very nice and secure in the hand. However, this camera is a bit chunkier compared to some of the other point and shoots that are on the market, but I actually prefer having a slightly heavier camera because that means that I get more stable video as I'm filming it. If you have a lighter camera, you might get more shakes and jitters, and that's something I definitely noticed when compared to shooting on the Sony ZV-1 Mark II, is even though this was bigger, it just handled much more nicely. And taking a look on this side of the PowerShot V1, you'll know these vents, and that is because there's a built-in cooling fan on this camera, which when they announced this, I literally clapped because I just knew this would be so great for a lot of video creators out there who are concerned about their camera overheating. We were shooting on hot, sunny days with the sun directly hitting it, and it did give me a few overheating warnings, but the camera never shut off on me. So reliably, I feel like I could shoot with this camera and know that it won't ever turn off or I'll have to risk losing a shot. A few other things that I liked about the design of the PowerShot V1 was this control ring on the front of the lens. You can program this to be a bunch of different things like the zoom or a focus ring. I actually found that the aperture ring was quite useful when it comes to shooting video. This means I could simply rotate it to adjust my exposure on the fly. There's also a new multifunctional hot shoe, which is compatible with some of Canon's other accessories, so it's great to see this on this camera. Now, one feature that this camera does not have that the ZV-1 Mark II does have is when you flip open the screen, the camera will automatically turn on. So I kind of expected that this V1 would do the same, but it actually didn't. I have to reach around, press on the on and off button. So maybe that could be a software firmware thing that they could include. That just makes shooting easier a lot quicker when you want to make sure you grab that shot of something cool happening. Let's talk about the image quality of the PowerShot V1. Starting off, let's take a look at its new sensor. It is larger than your traditional 1-inch sensor that's in the ZV-1 Mark II, but it's smaller than an APS-C lens, so almost like a micro Four Thirds sensor. But having a larger sensor is going to make sure that you have improved low light performance, as well as giving you more of a shallow depth of field. This sensor is also capable of shooting 22 megapixel stills, or when it comes to shooting video, which this camera is mainly designed for, we can do 4K video of up to 60 frames per second, although there is a crop of 1.4x in that mode. Now, this video quality is actually oversampled from 5.7K, which means you have the benefit of having a slightly sharper, more detailed image, but still having a 4K file. This camera will definitely deliver great image quality if you are filming talking head or filming yourself outside, vlogging, just a great looking image. We also get the benefit of Canon's lovely color picture style, so there are plenty of different options to choose from. I left my camera on the auto mode. I also explored with their new color filter modes. So with these new modes, you can kind of get a color graded look in your camera. So if those who are wanting more cinematic video but don't have the color grading skills, you can just mess around with these filters, and honestly, some of them look really great. Now, one of the biggest upgrades that this PowerShot V1 has is the ability to shoot 10-bit video with C-Log 3 color profile. So this is awesome if you are looking to really maximize the potential of your camera, get very cinematic color grades. If you know what you're doing, this is just amazing and something that I've been wanting from smaller cameras like from Sony, but this having full 10-bit definitely is super impressive, and I just love the look of the C-Log 3 I was able to get from this camera. And with this C-Log 3 profile, you have a ton of dynamic range to work with, which is just so awesome that you have such a great image in such a small form factor. And this really makes shooting content just a lot easier to take with you. This camera is not intimidating, it's pretty lightweight. So those times when you don't feel like bringing a heavy camera, I might actually find myself leaning towards the PowerShot V1 like I did on this trip. And one thing I do want to mention when it comes to shooting 10-bit on this camera is you can only do that when you are recording C-Log 3. You can't actually do this in the normal color profile modes. This was a little bit unexpected for me because I'm used to shooting in a normal color profile, but shooting in 10-bit if I still want to make tweaks a little bit later. I understand why Canon maybe have included 10-bit in only C-Log, since many beginners don't necessarily need to shoot 10-bit when it comes to shooting just a normal profile, and those people who may never color grade their videos. However, for someone like me, I like to have the flexibility and control over my camera, so I definitely would like the ability to shoot 10-bit and a normal color profile if I decide so. So now taking a look at the lens of the PowerShot V1, this is a 16 to 50mm f2.8 to 4.5 lens. Now this is a full frame equivalent, which means a 16mm at this focal length means you get a very, very wide image. And this is one of my favorite features of this camera, is because of this wide focal length, you could really just film yourself vlogging very easily, or you could fit two people within the camera frame without having to extend your arm all too far. You can also zoom into 50mm, which is another great focal length as well. So those times I want to get closer in on the action, I can just move the little zoom toggle and easily get smooth zoom in footage. And while we're on the topic of lenses, I do want to mention that this camera does have a built-in ND filter of 3 stops. So this is definitely nice when you are shooting on a brighter sunny day. You can enable this, and this gives you a little bit more flexibility when it comes to adjusting your camera settings. So let's talk about the stabilization of this camera. This camera does not have any sort of in-body image stabilization. All the stabilization is done is with the lens of the camera. However, to my surprise, when I was filming with this camera, I just realized how smooth this lens stabilization actually was. It really did help smooth out the shakes and jitters I would get if I'm shooting handheld behind the camera. I was able to pull off some nice dynamic moves without the camera being too shaky. And even if you are vlogging yourself, you'll definitely notice that it is a little bit more stable compared to something like the ZV-1 Mark II. Throughout this video, I've been comparing the PowerShot V1 to the Sony ZV-1 Mark II since it's the closest thing related. I plan on making a further in-depth video side-by-side comparison between those. If that is something of interest to you, let me know in the comments down below. Moving on to the autofocus of this camera. Now, Canon is known for having great video autofocus, and this camera is very much the same. It is great, it's reliable. Anytime that I'm in frame, I know it's going to be focused on me. You can easily just touch on the back of the screen if you want to change your autofocus points. So really great autofocus from here. Great if you are vlogging, talking head video. You can't go wrong. Now I do want to talk about the low light performance of this camera. Thanks to that larger sensor, I was really curious to see just how well it would perform in low light. And in some of these shots, I pushed my ISO up to 6400 and it still held up fairly well. And this is really impressive for a small camera like this. You're definitely not going to get as good as low light when you are shooting with a cheaper action camera or like the Pocket 3. And for some of these low light tests, they had these great Fire Stick twirler performers as well as these hula dancers. Oh yeah, and they made me do the luau. Okay, so let's talk about a few downsides of the PowerShot V1. I do think this is a phenomenal camera, especially for the price, but there were a few things I wish could be either improved upon, maybe a software update, or maybe something you want to consider if you are going to buy this camera. First off is the ability to only shoot 10-bit in C-Log 3, as I explained earlier in this video. It would be really great to be able to shoot 10-bit in a normal color profile for those who kind of want something in between. Number 2 is the 1/4-20 tripod mount is actually very close to the battery door. This means if you have your camera on a tripod or a quick release plate, you can't actually access that battery or SD card, which is just one of those things that is going to be annoying if you are filming quite a lot. Another limitation of this camera is the 4K 60 crop. This means if you are framed up for a shot and you decide to switch over to slow motion recording, then you're physically cropped into the sensor and you have to adjust your camera's frame or move back. and that really takes me out of the creative flow and slows me down when I am filming. I would really like to see a future model of the V1 where it has full 4K 60, no crop. Now, one issue I faced with the PowerShot V1, and I was kind of hesitant to include it in this video because I was working with a pre-production model of this camera. And that is when I was recording in 4K 60, some of my files, even though they say they're 60 frames per second, are only 30 frames per second. I never had that feature happen in a camera ever. Very, very weird. So again, I think this is just a limitation of my pre-production model. Sometimes I would get 60 frames per second, other times I wouldn't. I don't think that's gonna be an issue with the full release camera, so shouldn't be an issue, but maybe something to be aware of. Okay, so let's talk about the price point of the PowerShot V1 New. This camera is going to cost $899, pretty much the same as the Sony ZV-1 Mark II. However, I think this camera is way more capable when it comes to shooting video quality. I think that's a pretty fair value. Yes, it is getting a little bit expensive for a point and shoot style of camera, but it's definitely worth its weight, literally. And you can expect the PowerShot V1 to be shipping April 8th, so just around the corner. All right, so you might be asking yourself, who is this camera for? Should you pick up the PowerShot V1? I think this camera is great if you are vlogging. If you do YouTube content and you do a mix of vlogging and talking head, I think the PowerShot V1 is pretty much the best camera on the market that can do both really well. I also totally forgot to mention that you can totally live stream with this camera. So if you even do Zoom calls or live streaming, you can easily plug in a USB-C to this camera and get full HD recording, or plug in an HDMI and get 4K. So pretty great live streaming capabilities. Now, a reason you may not want to pick up the PowerShot V1 is because of the Canon R50V, which is a super impressive video-centric mirrorless camera from Canon, and body only, that costs $650. So cheaper, plus the ability to change lenses. I plan to do a full video, which you can check out right here, or if it's not out yet, you check out another video from us.